The conference room fell silent as Mom slid the ownership papers across the mahogany table toward my sister Sarah. 28 years of my life crumbled in that moment as I watched her signature transfer complete control of our three-generation family construction company to someone who had never swung a hammer or read a blueprint. Sarah's smirk cut through me like a rusty blade while Mom's words echoed in my skull. Riley lacks vision and reliability for leadership. The same hands that had bled building this business from bankruptcy now trembled as 43 employees stared at me with pity. My world imploded in 60 devastating seconds. The drive home from that nightmare meeting blurred past in a haze of disbelief and rage. My knuckles turned white, gripping the steering wheel of my beat-up Ford pickup, the same truck I had driven to countless job sites over the past 5 years. The radio played some cheerful country song about family loyalty, and I punched it off with enough force to crack the plastic dial. 5 years ago, everything changed when Dad collapsed on the Henderson job site. Massive heart attack at 52 gone before the ambulance arrived. I can still smell the sawdust that covered his lifeless body, still hear the sound of his tools scattering across the concrete foundation we had been pouring together that morning. He died believing in me, trusting that I would carry on the Morrison family legacy that his grandfather had started in 1923. Mom found me at the hospital that night, her mascara streaked down her cheeks like black rain. She grabbed my hands with desperate strength and begged me to abandon everything. Georgia Tech, my mechanical engineering degree, my full scholarship, my girlfriend Amanda, who was planning to move to California for her residency. The company was drowning in debt, she explained through sobs. Dad had been too proud to admit how bad things had gotten. We owed suppliers over $300,000, had lost 2 major contracts to competitors, and faced bankruptcy within 6 months. "Riley, you are the only one who can save us," she whispered that night. "Sarah is too young, still in college. The family needs you. Your father would have wanted this." So I walked away from my dreams. I called Amanda from the hospital parking lot and told her I could not follow her to the West Coast. Her silence stretched for an eternity before she whispered, "I understand, but I cannot wait for you to figure out your life." The dial tone felt like a gunshot to my chest. The next morning, I withdrew from Georgia Tech 3 months before graduation. My professors thought I had lost my mind. My academic advisor, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, actually called my mother to confirm I was making this decision willingly. But I signed the withdrawal papers and drove straight to our company headquarters, a weathered brick building on Industrial Boulevard that smelled like coffee and disappointment. Those first months nearly killed me. 18-hour days learning every aspect of the business Dad had never taught me. Plumbing, electrical work foundation, pouring roofing permits, inspections, payroll insurance, customer relations. My hands blistered and bled until they developed thick calluses. My back ached from lifting materials that weighed more than I did. I lost 30 pounds and gained a permanent squint from reading blueprints under harsh construction lights. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her art history degree at Emory University, living in a sorority house, and posting Instagram photos from spring break in Cabo. Mom paid her tuition from the company account while I worked weekends to cover basic expenses. Sarah would visit the office once or twice a month, usually to ask for spending money, treating our employees like servants, and complaining about the noise from the workshop. Slowly, painfully, I dragged Morrison Construction back from the edge. I modernized our equipment with carefully researched purchases, replacing Dad's ancient tools with efficient machinery that increased productivity by 40%. I digitized our entire filing system, creating databases that tracked every project expense and supplier relationship. Most importantly, I personally secured the contracts that rebuilt our reputation. The Turner Warehouse project was my breakthrough. 6 months of 12-hour days, problem-solving structural challenges that had stumped 3 other contractors. When we delivered 2 weeks early and $20,000 under budget words spread throughout the construction community. Suddenly, Morrison Construction had a waiting list of clients. By last year, we employed 43 skilled workers and cleared over $2 million annually. Tommy Rodriguez, our senior foreman, often told people that I had saved not just the company, but their families. Marcus Johnson, our head electrician, named his newborn son, Riley, in my honor. These men trusted me with their livelihoods, and I never took that responsibility lightly. But Mom saw none of this. She criticized my reckless spending on quality materials, questioned my project timelines, and constantly compared my management style unfavorably to Dad's approach. Sarah, now 25 with a degree she had never used, began attending board meetings as company consultant, despite knowing nothing about construction. Now pulling into the parking lot of my apartment complex, reality crashed over me like a collapsing wall. Sarah owned everything I had built. My sacrifice meant nothing. My loyalty was rewarded with humiliation in front of people who respected me. The familiar rage that had sustained me through 5 years of exhaustion finally exploded into something colder and more dangerous. I climbed the stairs to my second-floor apartment, keys shaking in my lock. The hallway smelled like Mrs. Patterson's perpetual pot roast and Mr. Kim's cigarette smoke. Normal smells from a normal evening that felt anything but normal. I needed a shower, a beer, and time to process what came next. But when I opened my apartment door, I found boxes stacked everywhere and a handwritten note taped to my refrigerator. My hands trembled as I recognized Mom's careful cursive. Real men do not need handouts. Prove yourself worthy of this family. Your belongings are in storage unit number 47 on Maple Street. The key is under the mat. Your lease terminated effective immediately. The note fluttered to the floor as I sank onto my couch, surrounded by the remnants of my life packed into cardboard containers. She had evicted me, her own son, the same day she gave my company to my sister. I sat there until darkness fell, staring at the walls I would never see again, understanding finally that mercy was not part of her plan. The Sleepy Inn Motel on Route 47 became my new reality. $29 per night for a room that smelled like industrial disinfectant mixed with decades of desperation. The carpet bore stains that told stories I did not want to imagine. The air conditioning unit rattled like a dying animal, and the neon sign outside my window flickered between red and blue all night, painting my temporary home in colors of emergency and warning. I stretched my savings by eating gas station sandwiches and instant noodles heated in the coffee maker. The bathroom mirror reflected a stranger's stubble growing into an unkempt beard, eyes red. From exhaustion and stress, the confident posture I had developed as a leader replaced by the hunched shoulders of defeat. Each morning, I walked to the nearby McDonald's to use their Wi-Fi, sending out job applications on a laptop balanced precariously on a sticky table. The responses crushed me more than the silence. Anderson Construction, where I'd worked a summer job in college, sent a formal rejection citing concerns about professional reliability. Watson Brothers, who had subcontracted with us on the Miller office complex, claimed they had no current openings, despite advertising for experienced foremen in the newspaper classifieds. Peterson Industries, our biggest competitor, suggested I consider career alternatives in their politely devastating 2-sentence reply. Mom had poisoned every well in the industry. Her phone calls to former colleagues painted me as unreliable, dishonest, possibly dangerous. She spread rumors about missing tools, botched projects, and inappropriate behavior with female employees. None of it was true, but perception became reality when you needed work to survive. The breaking point came during my 3rd week at the motel. I had swallowed my pride enough to apply for basic labor positions, anything that paid enough to keep me housed and fed. Home Depot, Lowe's, even the loading dock at the furniture warehouse. All rejected me within days of checking my references. I was blacklisted, completely professionally destroyed by the woman who had raised me. Desperation drove me to Martinez Hardware, a family-owned store wedged between a laundromat and a used car lot on the wrong side of town. The owner, Frank Martinez, was a 60-year-old Mexican-American man with calloused hands and suspicious eyes. His graying beard and weathered face spoke of decades in construction before transitioning to retail. He looked at my application with the expression of someone who had seen every sob story and empty promise the world could offer. You are overqualified for stocking shelves and mixing paint," he said in accented English that carried more authority than most college professors managed. "Why would someone with your background want minimum wage?" I could have lied, invented some noble reason about preferring smaller companies or seeking new challenges. Instead, I told him the truth. Everything. The family business, the betrayal, the blacklisting, the motel room that was draining my savings faster than I could replace them. Frank listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or grunting in understanding. "Your mother sounds like a real piece of work," he said finally. "But I do not hire people out of pity. Can you lift 50-pound bags of concrete mix for 8 hours without complaining?" "Yes, sir." "Can you deal with contractors who think hardware store employees are idiots?" "Absolutely." "Can you work for $7.25 an hour without stealing from me?" "You have my word." Frank studied my face for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Welcome to Martinez Hardware. Do not make me regret this." The work was mind-numbing compared to running construction projects. I unloaded delivery trucks, stocked shelves with nuts and bolts, mixed paint colors for weekend warriors, attempting home improvement disasters. But Frank paid me in cash at the end of each week, no questions asked, and treated me with more respect than my own family had shown. During my second month at the hardware store, I discovered the cruel extent of Sarah's incompetence through the large windows facing Industrial Boulevard. Morrison construction trucks drove past regularly, and I could see the changes she was implementing. The fleet looked smaller. The crew members appeared younger and less experienced. The equipment that I had carefully maintained was showing signs of neglect and poor operation. But I heard the real damage from Tommy Rodriguez when he entered the store on a Thursday afternoon in October. His weathered face, normally creased with laugh lines from 30 years of construction jokes, was haggard with worry. Tommy had been Dad's best friend and my mentor since childhood. He taught me to read levels, to judge material quality by touch, to lead through respect rather than fear. "Riley," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need help, man." Tommy's story poured out in broken sentences punctuated by long silences. Sarah had terminated 12 senior employees, including him, claiming the company needed fresh energy and cost efficiency. She replaced experienced craftsmen earning $25 per hour with recent graduates willing to work for 15. The quality of their work reflected the difference in pay. "My wife Maria is fighting cancer." Tommy continued, tears welling in his eyes. "Stage 3 breast cancer. The treatments cost $800 per session, and our insurance through Morrison was covering 70%. Now I got nothing. No income, no insurance, no way to pay for her medicine." He showed me pictures on his phone, Maria, in a hospital bed, pale and thin but smiling bravely for the camera. Their 3 children gathered around her, ages 10, 14, and 17. Kids who had called me Uncle Riley at company barbecues, who had drawn pictures of construction trucks that I kept pinned to my office bulletin board. "Sarah told me I was redundant and expensive," Tommy said bitterly. 30 years with that company, and she fired me in a text message. Did not even have the guts to tell me in person. The rage that had been building inside me for months finally found focus. Sarah was not just destroying the business I had built, she was destroying the lives of good people who depended on stable employment. Men with families, mortgages, dreams for their children's futures. Tommy was not the only one suffering. I began to understand that my personal humiliation was secondary to a larger injustice. That evening, I walked past the Morrison Construction office building. Through the lit windows, I could see Sarah celebrating with a group of friends in what used to be my office. She had redecorated with modern furniture that looked expensive and impractical. Wine glasses and laughter echoed from the building, while Tommy sat at home wondering how to pay for his wife's chemotherapy. Frank found me staring at the building when he came to lock up the hardware store. He followed my gaze and understood immediately. "Revenge is a dish best served cold," he said quietly. "But first you need to decide what kind of man you want to be. The kind who destroys his enemies or the kind who builds something better than what they destroyed?" His words echoed in my head as I returned to the motel room. The neon sign flickered, its eternal warning painting my walls in shades of red that reminded me of blood and anger. But Frank's question demanded an answer that would determine not just my future, but the futures of everyone Sarah was destroying with her incompetence and cruelty. I fell asleep that night planning the first steps of what would become either my redemption or my final destruction. Frank Martinez proved to be more than just an employer willing to give me a chance. As autumn deepened into winter, I began to understand that his hardware store was merely the visible portion of a much larger operation. During slow afternoons, when customer traffic dwindled, Frank would disappear into the back office for hours, emerging with blueprints, financial documents, and phone calls that had nothing to do with selling screws and paint. My breakthrough came when Mrs. Catherine Walsh, an elderly widow, entered the store seeking help with a foundation crack in her basement. The previous contractor had quoted her $8,000 for a repair that I could see would require maybe $300 in materials and 2 days of careful work. She was nearly in tears, explaining that her fixed income could not handle such an expense. "Ma'am, I said carefully, glancing toward Frank's office. "That crack is not as serious as they made it sound. The foundation is settling, but it is stabilized. A proper epoxy injection and some preventive waterproofing would solve your problem permanently." Frank appeared beside me as if summoned by magic. He listened while I explained the actual scope of work needed, watched while I sketched a simple repair plan on the back of a receipt, and nodded approvingly when I offered to do the work myself, for materials, plus $200 labor. After Mrs. Walsh left with tears of gratitude, Frank locked the front door and flipped the sign to close, despite the early hour. Follow me," he said, leading me through a door I had assumed was a storage closet. Behind that door lay a fully equipped workshop that rivaled anything Morrison Construction had ever possessed. Professional-grade tools hung from pegboards with military precision. A drafting table held architectural plans for projects I did not recognize. File cabinets lined one wall labeled with property addresses throughout the county. This was the workspace of someone still deeply involved in construction, despite officially running a hardware store. 23 years ago, Frank began settling into a worn leather chair. I owned Martinez Construction. 60 employees, $15 million in annual revenue, reputation for quality that brought clients from 3 states. I was successful, respected, and completely blind to the rot eating my business from the inside. His story unfolded like a cautionary tale, a business partner who slowly redirected contracts to shell companies he controlled, embezzlement disguised as legitimate expenses, false documentation that made Frank appear responsible for cost overruns and delayed projects. By the time Frank discovered the deception, his partner had stolen over $2 million and destroyed his professional reputation with carefully planted lies. "The lawsuits ruined me financially," Frank continued. "Bankruptcy, foreclosure, professional humiliation. I lost everything except this building, which was in my wife's name. Rosa stood by me through it all, worked double shifts at the hospital to keep us afloat, while I rebuilt from nothing." Frank's workshop told the story of his patient recovery. For 20 years, he had been quietly buying distressed properties around the county, through shell companies renovating them with his own labor, then selling or renting them at substantial profits. The hardware store provided legitimate income and perfect cover for his real activities. He had rebuilt his wealth without anyone knowing his true financial position. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Frank pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "Because I have been waiting for the right partner, someone with your skills, your knowledge of local construction, your understanding of what it takes to build something lasting." The folder contained property deeds, architectural plans, and financial projections that took my breath away. Frank owned 37 buildings throughout the county, including several commercial properties in prime locations. His net worth exceeded $5 million accumulated through 2 decades of careful investment and skilled labor. "I want to build a construction company that will make Morrison Construction look like a mom-and-pop operation," Frank said. "But I am 60 years old. I need someone with energy vision and the hunger to succeed. Someone who understands that the best revenge is not destroying your enemies, but making their failures irrelevant." He slid another document across the table, a partnership agreement offering me 40% ownership in a new company called Phoenix Construction. Frank would provide capital property and business guidance. I would contribute labor local knowledge and project management skills. We would start with a single ambitious project that would announce our arrival in the market. "The Henderson Mansion," Frank said, tapping a photograph of a deteriorating Victorian house on Elm Street. "Abandoned for 15 years, condemned by the city, considered impossible to renovate by every contractor who has examined it. The historical preservation requirements alone have scared off 8 different companies." I studied the photograph and accompanying inspection reports. The challenges were substantial foundation settling, roof damage, plaster deterioration, electrical systems from the 1920s, plumbing that belonged in a museum. The city estimated renovation costs at over $800,000, assuming a contractor could navigate the historical preservation bureaucracy. "Everyone else sees an impossible project," Frank continued. "I see an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that our competitors cannot match. Historic renovation requires patience, skill, and attention to detail that most modern contractors lack. You have the engineering background to solve structural problems and the craftsmanship to honor the original architecture." The proposed timeline was aggressive: 6 months to transform the Henderson Mansion into a showcase that would attract premium clients. Frank had already negotiated purchase of the property for $40,000 and secured preliminary approval from the Historical Preservation Committee. He estimated our potential profit at over $300,000 if we could deliver quality work on schedule. "What about Sarah's company?" I asked. "Morrison Construction will bid on projects like this." Frank smiled grimly. "Let them bid. Sarah has fired all the experienced workers and replaced them with children who think construction started with nail guns. They cannot handle complex projects requiring real skill. Meanwhile, we will be demonstrating capabilities they cannot match with workers they cannot afford to hire." I spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing Frank's proposal, checking his financial projections, and wrestling with doubts about my ability to succeed in such an ambitious venture. The partnership offered everything I had lost: financial security, professional respect, the chance to build something meaningful. But it also demanded risks I was not sure I was prepared to take. Frank did not pressure me for an immediate answer. Instead, he suggested we start small, with the Mrs. Walsh Foundation Repair working together to see if our partnership could function effectively. Over the following weekend, I discovered that Frank's knowledge complemented my own perfectly. His decades of experience had taught him shortcuts and techniques that improved my engineering-based approaches. My formal education filled gaps in his intuitive understanding of structural mechanics. Mrs. Walsh's basement repair became a masterclass in efficient problem-solving. Frank showed me how to diagnose foundation issues by interpreting crack patterns and water damage. I demonstrated modern epoxy injection techniques that created stronger bonds than traditional methods. Together, we completed the repair in 1 day instead of the predicted 2, with results that exceeded professional standards. This is what we can accomplish when experience meets education, Frank said as we cleaned our tools. Your mother and sister see construction as a business. We see it as a craft. That evening, I signed the partnership agreement and officially became co-owner of Phoenix Construction. Frank opened a bottle of expensive tequila that his late wife had given him for their 25th anniversary, and we toasted the beginning of what would become either my redemption or my final downfall. The next morning, we drove to the Henderson mansion to begin the project that would announce our arrival in the market and prove that sometimes the best revenge is building something so much better that your enemies become irrelevant. The Henderson mansion squatted on 3 acres of overgrown property, like a wounded giant refusing to die. Built in 1894 by railroad magnate Charles Henderson, the Victorian structure had housed 4 generations of the family before the last heir died childless, and the estate fell into municipal limbo. 15 years of abandonment had transformed architectural grandeur into a cautionary tale about impermanence and neglect. Frank and I stood in the weed-choked driveway on a cold February morning, our breath visible in the crisp air as we surveyed the mountain of work ahead. The roof displayed multiple areas where missing shingles exposed rotting underlayment to weather damage. Windows on the second floor hung at odd angles, their frames warped by moisture infiltration. The wraparound porch sagged under the weight of accumulated snow and structural compromise. "Why, yeah, beautiful bones," Frank murmured, running his hand along a carved pillar that had survived better than its surroundings. They built things to last in those days. Real materials, real craftsmanship, not like the particle board garbage they throw up now. I pulled out a clipboard thick with inspection reports, permit applications, and historical preservation guidelines. Our renovation had to satisfy multiple authorities: the City Building Department, the State Historical Commission, the Environmental Protection Agency, and a neighborhood association that had filed 3 separate challenges to our permit requests. 6 months, I said, reviewing our timeline. From condemned wreck to showcase property. Think we can do it? Frank's grin was answer enough. Boy, I've been dreaming about this project for 20 years. Every contractor in the county has walked away from this house calling it impossible. We're going to make them all look like amateurs. Our first challenge was structural. The foundation had settled unevenly, creating a network of cracks that had allowed water infiltration for over a decade. Traditional solutions involved excavating around the entire perimeter, an approach that would damage the historically significant landscaping and require permits we could not obtain in our time frame. I spent 2 weeks developing an alternative approach using micropile technology, borrowed from commercial construction. We would drive steel piles through the existing foundation to bedrock, then use hydraulic jacks to gradually lift and level the structure. The technique was complex, expensive, and required precision measurements that most residential contractors would never attempt. Frank handled the business side while I focused on engineering challenges. He negotiated with suppliers for materials that met historical authenticity requirements while staying within our budget. Original heart pine flooring, hand-forged wrought iron fixtures, slate roofing tiles that matched the original installation. Every component required research, comparison, shopping, and careful planning to ensure compatibility with 19th century construction techniques. Our breakthrough came when Frank introduced me to Carlos Mendoza, a master craftsman who specialized in historical restoration. Carlos had learned traditional plastering techniques from his grandfather, could recreate period-appropriate millwork using hand tools, and possessed an intuitive understanding of how old buildings were supposed to function. Modern contractors want to replace everything, Carlos explained during our first meeting. They tear out plaster and install drywall. They rip out original windows and install vinyl replacements. They destroy the character that makes these houses valuable. Carlos brought two assistants who shared his dedication to authentic restoration. Miguel Santos, a third-generation carpenter whose knowledge of joinery techniques had been passed down through family tradition, and Roberto Silva, an electrician who specialized in modernizing old houses without damaging their historical integrity. With our core team assembled, work began in earnest. 20-hour days became normal as we raced against weather bureaucracy and our own ambitious timeline. I arrived at the job site each morning before dawn, reviewing the previous day's progress and planning the next phase of work. Frank handled supplier coordination and permit compliance, while Carlos directed the restoration of architectural details that required artistic skill as much as construction knowledge. The foundation stabilization took 3 weeks of careful work. We drove 18 micropiles to bedrock, then used hydraulic jacks to lift the settled corners with movements measured in 1/16 of an inch per day. Too fast would crack the already stressed masonry. Too slow would extend our timeline beyond the point of financial viability. Each adjustment required laser measurements and constant monitoring to ensure the structure remained stable throughout the process. Meanwhile, Sarah's company was struggling with basic projects that should have been routine. I learned about their problems through industry gossip and Frank's connections with material suppliers. Morrison Construction had underbid a shopping center renovation by nearly $200,000, apparently not understanding the complexity of retrofitting modern systems into a building from the 1960s. Their inexperienced crew had damaged existing structural elements, creating safety hazards that required expensive corrections. "Honey, they are hemorrhaging money," Frank reported after lunch with the manager at Clearwater Electrical Supply. "Sarah has no idea how to estimate complex projects. She thinks construction is about showing up and swinging hammers until something gets built." The irony was not lost on me. While I struggled with the most challenging project of my career, Sarah was failing at jobs I could have completed with my eyes closed. Her workers lacked the experience to recognize problems before they became disasters. Her project management consisted of shouting at people when deadlines were missed. She had transformed a profitable company into an expensive lesson in the difference between inherited responsibility and earned competence. But I forced myself to focus on our work rather than her failures. The Henderson Mansion demanded every ounce of skill and attention I could provide. The electrical system required complete replacement while preserving the original fixtures and maintaining the house's historical appearance. Roberto designed a solution using modern wiring concealed within the original walls, installing contemporary safety features that remained invisible to casual observation. The plaster restoration proved even more challenging. Carlos and his team stripped away layers of paint and wallpaper that had concealed decades of water damage and poor repair attempts. Underneath, they found original frescoes in the main hallway that had been painted over sometime in the 1940s. Restoring the artwork required techniques that few craftsmen still possessed, but Carlos approached the project with the patience of a museum conservator. As spring arrived, our progress accelerated. The roof replacement used reclaimed slate tiles that Frank had located through a demolition company in Virginia. Miguel rebuilt the wraparound porch using heart pine salvaged from a tobacco warehouse, matching the original construction so precisely that experts would need careful examination to identify new work from old. Local attention began building as word spread about our ambitious renovation. The city planning department used our project as an example of responsible historical preservation. The neighborhood association, initially opposed to any development, became supportive as they realized we were enhancing property values throughout the area. Real estate agents brought prospective buyers to view our progress, and 2 other property owners approached Frank about similar restoration projects. But our biggest validation came when Morrison Construction submitted a bid for the municipal courthouse renovation project. Their proposal was professionally prepared and competitively priced, suggesting that Sarah had hired someone capable of creating accurate estimates. However, their bid included a projected timeline that anyone with experience would recognize as unrealistic for the scope of work involved. Frank and I attended the public hearing where bids were reviewed. Sarah presented her proposal with confidence that bordered on arrogance, emphasizing Morrison Construction's established local presence and competitive pricing structure. She wore a business suit that probably cost more than most of her workers earned in a week, and spoke in buzzwords that revealed her fundamental lack of understanding about construction realities. The city engineer asked pointed questions about their approach to retrofitting modern accessibility features into a building from 1896. Sarah's answers were vague and technically incorrect, revealing that she had not personally reviewed the architectural challenges involved. Her electrical subcontractor looked uncomfortable as she made promises about timeline and capabilities that he clearly knew were unrealistic. We did not bid on the courthouse project, focusing instead on completing the Henderson Mansion to demonstrate our capabilities for future opportunities. But watching Sarah's presentation confirmed that her inexperience was becoming a liability that would eventually destroy Morrison Construction without any assistance from me. The thought should have provided satisfaction, but instead I felt a mixture of pity and regret. She was destroying something that 4 generations had built, squandering opportunities that would never return, and betraying the trust of employees who deserved better leadership. Her failure was inevitable, but the collateral damage would harm people who had done nothing wrong. Frank noticed my mood that evening as we reviewed progress photos from the Henderson Mansion. "Second thoughts about letting her dig her own grave?" he asked. "She is taking good people down with her," I replied. "Tommy Rodriguez is not the only one suffering. Marcus Johnson, Pete Williams, half a dozen others who depended on stable employment to support their families." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "The question is whether you try to save them or focus on building something better that can hire them later." It was a question that would haunt me as we approached completion of our showcase project and prepared to announce Phoenix Construction to the local market. The answer would determine not just the future of our business, but the kind of man I would become through the process of rebuilding my life from the ashes of betrayal. The Henderson Mansion transformed through spring like a patient recovering from near-fatal illness. Each completed phase revealed beauty that had been hidden beneath decades of neglect and poor maintenance. The wraparound porch gleamed with fresh paint in historically accurate colors, researched through old photographs and city records. Original windows, painstakingly restored rather than replaced, sparkled with new glass set in frames that Carlos had rebuilt using traditional joinery techniques. Frank and I worked 18-hour days as our deadline approached. The Historical Preservation Committee had scheduled their final inspection for May 15th, and any deficiencies would delay our certificate of occupancy by months. We could not afford delays. Our entire business plan depended on completing the Henderson project on schedule and under budget to establish credibility for future contracts. The pressure was affecting everyone on our small crew. Carlos had developed a persistent cough from dust exposure despite our ventilation precautions. Miguel's hands were cramped from weeks of detailed millwork that required precision, measured in 64ths of an inch. Roberto had been troubleshooting electrical issues that stemmed from the building's complicated history of modifications and repairs. But the most challenging obstacle was not technical. David Chen, the city building inspector assigned to our project, had been raising increasingly nitpicky objections to our work. Every inspection revealed new requirements that had not been mentioned in previous reviews. Permits that should have been routine were delayed by requests for additional documentation. Phone calls went unreturned for days, then prompted demands for meetings at inconvenient times. "Chen is being influenced by someone," Frank said after another frustrating encounter. "This level of harassment is not normal, even for a complex historical project." I suspected Sarah's involvement but could not prove anything. Morrison Construction had bid on several projects that we were also considering creating direct competition that had not existed when we started the Henderson renovation. Sarah might be using her family's political connections to create problems for potential competitors. The revelation came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos Miguel's wife worked part-time in the city planning office processing permit applications. She called Miguel one evening with information that changed everything. David Chen has been receiving pressure from someone named Sarah Morrison, Maria reported. She has been calling his supervisor, claiming that Phoenix Construction lacks proper licensing and insurance for historical renovation work. Chen is covering himself by scrutinizing every detail of your project. Sarah's strategy was more sophisticated than I had given her credit for. Rather than direct sabotage, she was using bureaucratic harassment to delay our progress and increase our costs. Each additional inspection cost us time and money we could not afford to lose. Extended timelines threatened our relationships with suppliers who had extended credit based on prompt completion schedules. But Sarah had made a critical error. Her accusations about our licensing and insurance were demonstrably false, creating legal liability if we could prove she was knowingly spreading misinformation to harm our business. Frank consulted with his attorney, who suggested documenting every interaction with city officials while building a case for interference with business relationships. The break we needed came from the courthouse renovation project that Morrison Construction had won with their unrealistic bid. 3 weeks into the work, serious problems began emerging that confirmed my suspicions about their capabilities. The local newspaper reported unexpected delays, caused by structural complications that were not apparent during the initial assessment. I drove past the courthouse job site during lunch break and immediately understood their predicament. Morrison Construction had attempted to install modern handicap-accessible ramps without properly reinforcing the building's foundation to support additional loads. Cracks had appeared in the exterior walls, where new construction connected to original masonry. The damage was visible from the street and clearly violated multiple building codes. Frank's contacts in the building department confirmed our observations. The courthouse project had been red-tagged for safety violations that would require extensive corrections before work could continue. Morrison Construction faced potential liability for structural damage that could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to repair properly. Sarah bit off more than she can chew, Frank observed. Her workers do not have the experience to handle complex retrofitting. They are making mistakes that experienced contractors would avoid. But the courthouse disaster was only the beginning. Frank's network of suppliers began reporting payment delays from Morrison Construction that suggested serious cash flow problems. Materials delivered to job sites remained unused, while crews struggled with problems that competent supervision would have prevented. Customer complaints about quality and timeline overruns were becoming common throughout the local construction community. The tipping point arrived on a Thursday morning in early May, when I discovered code violations that would have deadly consequences if not corrected immediately. David Chen, despite his harassment of our project, had maintained professional standards in his inspection responsibilities. During a routine visit to review our electrical work, he mentioned serious concerns about recent Morrison construction projects. "I probably should not be telling you this," Chen said quietly. "But there are safety issues with their work on the municipal building that keep me awake at night. Electrical installations that violate basic codes, structural modifications that compromise load-bearing capacity. Someone is going to get hurt if those problems are not addressed." Chen's conscience was bothering him because he had approved some of the questionable work under pressure from Sarah's political connections. Now he faced a professional and ethical dilemma: report the violations and risk his job, or stay silent and risk public safety. I faced my own moral choice. The evidence Chen described could destroy Morrison Construction and end Sarah's career permanently. Anonymous reports to state safety inspectors would trigger investigations. That Sarah could not survive politically or financially. I could achieve total revenge with a single phone call. But Chen's concerns about public safety were legitimate. The municipal building housed the city clerk's office, the tax assessor, and public meeting rooms. used by hundreds of people weekly. Structural deficiencies or electrical hazards could cause injuries or deaths that would haunt me forever if I chose revenge over responsibility. That evening, I sat in the Henderson Mansion's restored library, surrounded by the beauty that careful craftsmanship could create, wrestling with a decision that would define my character permanently. Frank found me there after midnight, staring at Chen's business card and a list of phone numbers for state regulatory agencies. "Tough choice," Frank said, settling into a chair Carlos had restored to museum quality. "She destroyed my life," I replied. "Stole my company, ruined my reputation, made me homeless. I have every right to destroy her the way she destroyed me." "You do," Frank agreed. "But the question is not about rights. It is about what kind of man you want to be when this is over." Frank's words echoed my father's teachings about responsibility and integrity. Dad had often said that anyone could tear things down, but it took real character to build something lasting. Revenge would feel satisfying for a moment, but it would not create the kind of legacy that honored his memory or justified the sacrifices I had made. I picked up my phone and dialed the state building inspector's emergency hotline. The violations Chen had described were too dangerous to ignore, regardless of personal consequences. Public safety had to take precedence over private vengeance. The inspector who answered took my report seriously, promising a full investigation within 48 hours. I provided specific details about the structural and electrical problems without mentioning Sarah by name or revealing my personal connection to Morrison Construction. The evidence would speak for itself. As I hung up the phone, Frank smiled with approval. "Your father would be proud," he said simply. But pride was cold comfort compared to the satisfaction revenge would have provided. I had chosen the harder path, and I would have to live with the consequences of showing mercy to someone who had shown me none. The next morning brought news that would test my decision in ways I had not anticipated. Tommy Rodriguez called with information that changed everything I thought I knew about my family and the forces that had shaped my life. The state building inspector arrived at the municipal building within 36 hours of my anonymous report, accompanied by electrical safety specialists and structural engineers whose presence could not be hidden from public view. By noon, the building was evacuated and cordoned off with yellow tape that attracted local television crews and newspaper reporters seeking explanations for the dramatic response. Frank and I watched the unfolding crisis from the Henderson Mansion, where we were applying final touches to restoration work that had consumed 4 months of 20-hour days. The irony was not lost on me. While Sarah's company was being destroyed by incompetence and corner cutting, our project was approaching completion with craftsmanship that would set new standards for historical renovation in the region. "The municipal building will be closed for at least 6 weeks, Frank reported after speaking with his contact in the city engineer's office. They found electrical code violations that could have caused fires and structural modifications that weakened load-bearing walls. Morrison Construction is facing lawsuits from the city, the state, and probably the federal government for Americans with Disabilities Act violations." The local newspaper's afternoon edition led with photographs of the condemned building and quotes from officials expressing outrage about safety violations that had somehow passed initial inspections. Sarah's name appeared throughout the article, along with speculation about criminal liability for knowingly installing substandard work in a public facility. But my satisfaction at Sarah's downfall evaporated when Tommy Rodriguez appeared at our job site that evening, his face pale, with an urgency that transcended normal construction emergencies. Tommy had been trying to find work since his termination from Morrison Construction, struggling to pay for his wife's cancer treatments while competing against younger workers willing to accept lower wages. "Riley, I need to talk to you about something that is going to turn your world upside down," Tommy said, glancing around to ensure we were alone. "Your mom asked me to keep this secret for 28 years, but what is happening now changes everything." Tommy's revelation unfolded like a nightmare that explained mysteries I had never thought to question. 29 years ago, my mother had an affair with Robert Klein, a successful architect who had designed several Morrison construction projects. The relationship lasted 6 months before Klein moved to California to join a prestigious firm. Mom discovered her pregnancy 2 weeks after Klein's departure and chose to let my father believe the child was his. Your dad never suspected, Tommy continued. Sarah looks enough like your mom's side of the family that nobody questioned the resemblance. But Robert Klein has been sending money every month since Sarah was born. $25,000 annually officially designated as consulting fees for architectural services. The financial support explains Sarah's privileged treatment throughout her childhood and college years. While I worked construction jobs to pay for basic expenses, Sarah received an allowance that funded her sorority dues, spring break vacations, and expensive clothing. The money I had assumed came from company profits was actually child support from her biological father. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, though the answer was becoming obvious. "Because your mom is planning to blame you for Morrison Construction's problems," Tommy said. "She is telling people that Sarah's mistakes resulted from following your systems and procedures. She wants to claim that you sabotaged the company before leaving and that the current problems stem from damage you caused." Mom's strategy was brilliantly cruel. She would sacrifice Sarah to save herself, claiming that poor management decisions resulted from following flawed systems I had established. Sarah would become a scapegoat while Mom emerged as a victim of my alleged sabotage. The biological relationship that had driven decades of favoritism would be abandoned the moment it became inconvenient. "There is more," Tommy continued reluctantly. "Robert Klein is flying in from California to help Sarah. He has connections with major construction companies on the West Coast and enough money to bail Morrison Construction out of their current problems. Your mom plans to restructure the company with Klein as primary investor and Sarah as a figurehead while she maintains actual control." The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. Sarah was not just my mother's favorite child. She was the biological daughter of another man who possessed resources to rescue her from consequences that would destroy any other contractor. Meanwhile, I was being positioned as the villain responsible for problems that resulted from incompetence and corner cutting I had specifically warned against. Frank listened to Tommy's story with the grim expression of someone who had survived similar family treachery. When Tommy finished, Frank poured 3 glasses of expensive bourbon and raised his in a bitter toast. "To families that teach us the difference between blood relations and true loyalty," Frank said. But Tommy was not finished. His final revelation struck at the foundation of everything I believed about my father's legacy and my own identity. "Your dad knew about Sarah," Tommy said quietly. "He figured it out when she was about 10 years old and started looking more like Klein than anyone in your family. But he loved her anyway, treated her like his own daughter, and made me promise to watch over both of you after he was gone." Dad's knowledge of Sarah's paternity explained behavior I had misinterpreted for years. His insistence on teaching me advanced construction skills while encouraging Sarah's artistic interests. His detailed discussions with me about business operations while treating Sarah like a cherished guest rather than a potential successor. He had been preparing me to carry on the family legacy while protecting Sarah from responsibilities she was not equipped to handle. "He wanted you to take care of her," Tommy continued. "Not because she deserved it, but because that is the kind of man he raised you to be. He would be heartbroken to see what this family has become." The weight of Dad's expectations settled on my shoulders like lead. He had trusted me to protect both the family business and Sarah herself, even knowing she was not his biological daughter. My current success with Phoenix Construction honored his memory, but my willingness to see Sarah destroyed violated his trust in ways that cut deeper than her betrayal had. Frank understood my dilemma without explanation. "The question is not whether she deserves your help," he said. "The question is what kind of man your father believed you could become. That night, I walked through the completed Henderson mansion, admiring restoration work that exceeded every expectation we had established 4 months earlier. The project had proven our capabilities and established Phoenix Construction as a serious competitor in the regional market. We had succeeded beyond our most optimistic projections. But success felt hollow, knowing that Sarah's destruction would vindicate Mom's claim that I was motivated by revenge rather than justice. The public would see a family feud rather than a principled stand against incompetence and corruption. Dad's legacy would be tainted by association with a son who chose personal satisfaction over family loyalty. The solution came to me as I stood in the mansion's restored kitchen, surrounded by craftsmanship that honored the past while serving present needs. Phoenix Construction had the resources to offer employment to Morrison Construction's displaced workers. We could build something better than what Sarah had destroyed while providing economic security for people who deserved stable careers. But helping Sarah herself would require swallowing pride and anger that had sustained me through months of humiliation and hardship. It meant choosing forgiveness over justice, mercy over revenge, growth over destruction. It meant becoming the man my father had believed I could be, rather than the man my mother's betrayal had created. Frank found me in the kitchen at dawn, staring at architectural plans that represented our future projects and the lives we could change through principled leadership. "Decision made?" he asked. "Dad always said the measure of a man was not how he treated people who helped him, but how he treated people who hurt him," I replied. "Sarah hurt me, but destroying her would not honor his memory or build the kind of company we want to lead." Frank smiled with approval that meant more than any business success we might achieve. "Your father raised a good man," he said simply. "The decision to show mercy rather than seek revenge would test every principle I claimed to believe, but it was the only choice that honored Dad's legacy and justified the trust he had placed in me to carry on values that transcended blood relationships or business success." 2 years later, I stood in the executive office of Phoenix Construction, watching Sarah demonstrate proper foundation inspection techniques to Jennifer Walsh, a recent college graduate who had joined our apprenticeship program. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see 6 project sites where our crews were working on everything from historic renovations to modern commercial buildings. Sarah's transformation had been neither quick nor easy. When Morrison Construction collapsed under the weight of lawsuits and safety violations, she approached me with desperation that had finally burned away years of entitlement and arrogance. Mom had abandoned her the moment Klein's money could not solve their problems, leaving Sarah to face bankruptcy and professional ruin alone. "I do not know anything about construction," Sarah had admitted during our first conversation in over a year. "I thought running a company meant telling people what to do and collecting profits. I was wrong about everything." Frank had counseled patience when I offered Sarah an entry-level position with Phoenix Construction. She would start at $12 per hour, the same wage we paid high school graduates entering our training program. No special treatment, no executive privileges, no recognition of her previous title or family connection. She would earn advancement through demonstrated competence or find employment elsewhere. The first 6 months tested everyone's resolve. Sarah's soft hands blistered from manual labor she had never experienced. Her back ached from lifting materials that skilled workers handled effortlessly. She made mistakes that cost time and materials requiring patience from supervisors who remembered her previous arrogance. Several employees quit rather than work alongside someone they viewed as undeserving of a second chance. But Carlos Mendoza, our master craftsman, saw potential that others missed. Sarah possessed artistic sensibilities that complemented technical skills when properly channeled. Her art history education provided knowledge about architectural styles and period-appropriate details that enhanced our historical renovation projects. Most importantly, her personal experience with failure had created humility that made learning possible. She asks good questions now, Carlos reported after Sarah's first year. She listens when you explain techniques instead of pretending she already knows everything. Pride was her biggest problem, and losing everything cured that. Sarah's breakthrough came during restoration of the Blackwell Opera House, a 1920s venue that had been damaged by decades of neglect. Research revealed that the original interior had featured hand-painted murals depicting scenes from classical mythology. Previous contractors had painted over the artwork with industrial primer, assuming it was too damaged to salvage. Sarah spent 3 months painstakingly removing paint layers, with techniques she had learned from Carlos revealing artwork that local historians had believed was lost forever. Her patience and artistic knowledge uncovered details that professional art restorers had missed, creating a restoration centerpiece that attracted national attention from preservation societies. "I never understood why Dad loved this work so much," Sarah told me, after the Opera House reopened to standing ovations. "I thought construction was about making money. But bringing something beautiful back to life, seeing people's faces when they experience what we have created, that is worth more than any profit margin." Mom's reaction to Sarah's transformation was predictably bitter. She had remarried Robert Klein and moved to California, where his architectural practice provided the lifestyle she had always coveted. Her final conversation with me came through Tommy Rodriguez, who reported her anger that I had corrupted Sarah with blue-collar values instead of helping her rebuild Morrison Construction. "Your mom cannot understand why Sarah chose to stay with Phoenix when Klein offered to fund a new company," Tommy said. "She thinks you brainwashed her into accepting poverty instead of claiming her rightful inheritance." But Sarah's choice reflected understanding that transcended financial considerations. She had learned the difference between inherited privilege and earned respect, between authority based on position and leadership based on competence. Phoenix Construction offered her something Morrison Construction never had: the satisfaction of building something meaningful through personal effort and skill. Tommy Rodriguez had become our senior project supervisor after his wife's successful cancer treatment, leading crews with wisdom earned through 3 decades of experience. Marcus Johnson had joined us as head electrician, bringing expertise that enhanced every project we touched. Pete Williams, Danny Morrison, Lisa Chen, and 8 other former Morrison Construction employees had found homes with Phoenix Construction, creating continuity that honored Dad's legacy while serving present needs. Frank's guidance had been essential throughout the rebuilding process. His business acumen balanced my idealistic tendencies, ensuring that compassion did not compromise profitability. Phoenix Construction employed 63 people and maintained a project backlog extending 18 months into the future. Our reputation for quality and reliability brought clients from 3 states seeking craftsmanship that honored traditional techniques while embracing modern efficiency. The Henderson Mansion had become our calling card, featured in architectural magazines and historical preservation publications. Tours were scheduled monthly for professionals seeking examples of responsible restoration techniques. The project had established Phoenix Construction as the regional leader in historic renovation, while proving that excellence was possible when experience, education, and integrity converged around shared values. But our greatest achievement was not financial or professional. We had created a company culture that valued people over profits, quality over quantity, growth over exploitation. Our apprenticeship program trained young workers in trades that offered stable careers and personal satisfaction. Our project management approach emphasized collaboration rather than competition, teaching employees that success was measured by collective achievement rather than individual advancement. Sarah had emerged as a natural teacher within our training programs. Her ability to explain complex concepts in accessible language, combined with hard-won understanding of how easily pride could destroy opportunity, made her particularly effective with apprentices who struggled with basic skills. She had found purpose that transcended her personal ambitions. I used to think I was entitled to respect because of my family name, Sarah reflected during our second anniversary celebration. Now I understand that respect is earned through service to others and commitment to excellence. Phoenix Construction gave me the chance to become someone worth respecting. The life lesson that had emerged from our family's destruction and rebuilding was profound in its simplicity. True success was not about defeating enemies or claiming inheritance, but about building something so much better that previous failures became irrelevant. The greatest revenge was not destruction, but creation. Not tearing down, but building up, not proving others wrong, but proving yourself worthy of the trust that others placed in your leadership. Dad's photograph still occupied a place of honor in my office, but it was now surrounded by images that represented the Phoenix Construction family we had built together. Tommy's grandchildren visiting job sites during summer vacation. Carlos teaching traditional plastering techniques to eager apprentices. Sarah covered in sawdust after completing her first independent restoration project. Frank smiling beside the latest architectural magazine featuring our work. These photographs told the story of redemption through hard work, forgiveness through understanding, and success through service to others. They proved that loyalty was stronger than blood, that character was more valuable than inheritance, and that the best way to honor the past was by building a future worthy of the sacrifices that made it possible. As I watched Sarah guide Jennifer through the complexities of foundation engineering, I realized that Dad's greatest gift had not been the family business or construction knowledge he had passed down. His greatest gift was the example of how to treat people with dignity and respect, regardless of circumstances, how to lead through service rather than dominance, and how to build something lasting through integrity and hard work. Phoenix Construction had risen from the ashes of family betrayal to become something better than Morrison Construction had ever been. But more importantly, we had proven that character could triumph over circumstances, that forgiveness was stronger than revenge, and that the best way to defeat those who had wronged you was to build something so much better that their failures became footnotes in your success story. What would you do if your own family betrayed your trust and destroyed everything you had worked to build? Would you choose revenge or redemption, destruction or creation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know about times when you had to choose between getting even or getting better. If this story of family betrayal and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming adversity through determination and integrity. And share this video with anyone who might need inspiration to rebuild their life after devastating setbacks. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to redemption. Remember that setbacks are setups for comebacks, and sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from becoming someone they could never destroy. Until next time, keep building something better.